I also sat down with the Senate's minority leader, Nickie Antonio. I asked her if her caucus had any beefs with the Capitol budget, which she said showed a very fair distribution across the state. So do you have any beefs with the Capitol budget as it passed?
You know, my members have beefs. There is never enough distributed in our local communities. It's probably the complaint of every single one of my members in both the Senate and the House. But overall, I really believe that there's a very fair distribution of these funds across the state. I think with a very difficult process, it was a very fair process.
Do you have any concerns about the one-time money, the funding, the projects that were chosen, anything like that, the focus of that spending on that one-time money?
Well, I'll tell you, the place where I have the most concern is the places where one-time money, and we're still going through the lists throughout the state because it's a lot to get through. I have concerns about dedicating money to for-profit projects. I think if there's one beef I have with that, your words, it's the fact that I don't believe we should have funded for-profit projects. There are so many nonprofit entities, organizations that provide public service. Now, I know those projects will spur on the economic base, and they are very innovative in some ways, transformational maybe, but they're for profit. So ultimately, I really believe all of the funds should have been used really strictly focusing on nonprofit and governmental entities.
We're at the end of the fiscal year. The state is required to have a balanced budget. Tax collections are off by $429.4 million, according to OBM's monthly report for May. Senator Matt Dolan and OBM Director Kim Murnix have pointed out that this is the end of a 2-year look-back period for pass-through entities being able to deduct their federal and their state, and it means that they were due refunds. Now, Dolan says he thinks things will stabilize. Certainly there's a question, though, about whether tax cuts are the reason for this.
Well, and Democrats always question tax cuts and question the fact that where will you fill in if you have a loss, and always what is mentioned is increasing the sales tax, which disproportionately affects low-income people. I don't believe that's ever the answer. I think the tax cuts have something to do with the fact that there's less revenue coming in, absolutely.
And Dolan said that he thinks as things stabilize, the sales tax will come in and kind of fill that gap, but that's a concern.
Well, it's a concern going forward, especially if we're talking about additional tax cuts. And you know, one of the things, again, that I have and many of my Democratic colleagues have long talked about is a refundable EITC, that earned income tax credit. And we get crickets when we ask or talk about it. We did finally get the earned income tax credit, at least in the last budget, but not refundable. And to me, if you're really going to focus on tax credits, then how about we provide one to the lowest income people in the state of Ohio, because we know that they will spend that money locally in the communities. It's a win-win.
One of the bills that passed in this marathon session in the House and Senate on Wednesday was a College Credit Plus program that includes a provision that would require K-12 schools and public and private colleges and universities to ensure students and adults use the bathroom of the gender on their birth certificates. Are you surprised that this was added in at this time?
You know, the 11th hour, adding something that is, culture war at its highest point, for a talking soundbite, which is what I believe these bills are intended to do, I think is disappointing. It's beneath the legislature to constantly allow a minority of members to drumbeat on an issue that isn't even an issue. It affects less than 1% of the population. And frankly, to be obsessed about young people and children's genitals seems beneath the legislature to me. It seems to me like we have so many more issues that are important that we should be focusing on. And frankly, I wanted to mention, I heard from some high school students who did a survey of the condition of bathrooms in their high schools. And they talked to me about the fact that not only are their bathrooms in disrepair in many of the high school students that they talk to, they're inaccessible often, and kids have to wait too long to even use a restroom. So if the Ohio legislature is going to focus on restrooms and bathrooms, we should be focusing on how to make them operational for all the children that need to use them every day. It's a health and safety issue.
Not to mention there are studies that show it's transgender students who are the most at risk in bathroom situations of assault, not.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I wanted to ask you too about Senate Bill 83. It did not pass, but Senator Jerry Serino says it's not dead yet. It could come back in lame duck. And he said if it comes back next year, he will not make the concessions that he made this time. Senator Matt Dolan suggested to me that it may not even be needed because colleges and universities are making the changes that were brought to light through this bill. What are your thoughts on Senate Bill 83?
Well, first of all, I have always been very concerned about that bill. I think if it were instituted, it would actually destroy higher ed in a lot of ways, quash the ability of people to have a conversation, an open, honest conversation. The premise of the bill suggests that there are groups of people who only for their ideology are not allowed to speak or participate, and I don't believe that to be true. Every time an example is used, it's one national example that gets brought out of a time when somebody was booed when they were giving a presentation. Well, I think that most people are a little thicker skinned and can, if they're speaking about controversial issues, that they're used to sometimes people not agreeing with them and expressing that. And if not, they probably should do something else for a living. I just am, it's a nationwide, highly coordinated strategy. I mean, this is going on across the country to try to really rein in the ability of students to and professors to have free speech on campuses. I think we should be very concerned about that. I do not understand the senators putting out there that he's not going to, that he's been, nice this year and next year he won't be nice about having a conversation. That is no way to legislate. Part of what our job is to put an idea out there, to bring in interested parties, people who would be affected, have a conversation, and then come to some kind of, I've got a word for Senator Serino, compromise. That is what our government was built on. It's what our democracy was built on. It is what is a huge part of our job. We need to figure out how to go to the middle and compromise, because ultimately that end result is going to be the best for most people. And that's what we should be working towards.
Because the capital budget has an emergency clause attached, it will take effect immediately after Governor Mike DeWine signs it.